Okay, so thank you to each and every individual who is here. This is the first webinar in a series of webinars which we're going to be looking at in the following weeks. The practice of alchemy is one which has been greatly misunderstood over many generations. So we're going to try to clear up what the practice of alchemy is, how it relates to our mind, how it relates to our life. This is going to be an interactive session, so everyone is encouraged to ask your questions, get your mute button off, ask your questions and get your answers. So we're going to try to answer everything as completely as possible. Of course, no answer or no justification is absolute. So everything is always subject to perception. Every truth is just a half truth, always depending to perception. So how we're going to be doing this is that there will be some information presented and then some questions. And then we're going to get to discussing and being able to find complete or simple answers to complex questions. Okay. So in this webinar, we're going to look at various things. We're going to look at the different stages of development of man, mainly the difference between man in his stage of blindness and man in his stage of awakening. What is the stage of blindness and what is the awakening? We're going to look at the process of mental purification. In other words, self-transformation. In other words, the process through which man transforms himself from a victim of life to a master of life. From a victim of his mind, of his thoughts, of his emotions, to a master of his thoughts, his emotions. We're also going to be looking at the belief which has created so much conflict in the world over the past thousands of years, which is the belief in separation, the illusion of separation, the separate self being different, being something separate to the rest of the world. So we're going to look into that as well. We're going to look at law in the cosmos, law in the universe. Is the cosmos under law and order, or is it under chance? So we're going to discuss this and try to come to a reasonable conclusion. And finally, we're going to look at the great power which each and every single living creation, living human holds, which is the power of his attention. What is the power of man's attention? How can he use his attention? How can he retrain his attention to become the conscious creator of his destiny? Before we start, are there any questions? Is everyone able to hear properly? Everyone has a good signal?
Yes.
Thank you. So please confirm, guys. Get your unmute and confirm so that we can all communicate together.
Yes.
Thank you, Amin.
Yes, going good.
I can hear it.
Perfect, guys. Thus, the first thing we're going to look at before we look at certain sayings is just the general pyramid of development which man undertakes throughout his incarnation, throughout his life. Thus, these are 4 general steps which can obviously go into infinite levels, but through these 4 steps, man becomes the master of his destiny. The first stage is the stage of blindness. This stage is characterized by chaos, by conflict. In this stage, man feels like a victim of the world. He does not find the cause to the effect, does not see the cause to the consequence. He feels like life is happening to him instead of by him. In the stage of blindness, man experiences a state similar to hell. Constant pain and suffering. He turns right, he finds pain. He turns left, he finds pain. The morning he wakes up sad. In the afternoon, he might be a bit happier. The very next day, back to sadness. So a constant emotional roller coaster. The stage of blindness. Yes. Sorry, go ahead.
Can man stay in the stage for his entire life?
It is understood that man's life lasts much more than 1 incarnation. Thus, yes, many humans, many of us have started our life in the stage of blindness and still have not passed the threshold into the stage of awakening. However, this does not mean that we have not developed, because within the stage of blindness, there are infinite levels until one crosses the threshold and reaches the stage of awakening. Does that answer your question, my friend?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. And thus, from the stage of blindness, from the pain and suffering, constant pain and suffering, one day man awakens. Man awakens, and what does he realize? He realizes that all his pain and suffering was the product of his own creation. He realizes that his external reality, what he perceives externally, is a mirror reflection of his internal reality. And what is his internal reality? We're talking about his belief system, his thoughts, his emotions, how he feels, what he thinks in relation to the world. And he realizes that every single thing that has happened to him in his life has not been the product of an external God dictating his fate, has not been the product of bad luck. It has been the product of his own work. The energy he emits is the energy he receives. And this is the great awakening which man realizes. Each man will grasp this awakening, will undertake this awakening at some point in his life. Be it in this incarnation or the next one, at some point man will realize that he is at the center of his own web of circumstances. And though at first this realization may feel painful, why painful? Because it hurts to believe and to realize that, man, all this pain, all this suffering that I have been through has been of my own creation. I have been the only one responsible. My world has literally been acting as a mirror. What I have emitted to the mirror has reflected. And thus it is difficult to fathom, to understand, and to take in that all the pain, all the suffering has been the product of my creation. Now, however, even though this realization hurts, it definitely does hurt. It is also the greatest realization, the most empowering realization that man may make in his lifetime. Why? Because for all the stage of blindness, from the beginning of this life and the previous ones, man has felt clueless, has felt powerless in front of his life. It feels like life is a punishment because I can't control anything. I have no say over anything. Something hits me from here, I hit it from there, it hits me back from there. And thus when I realized that life is not random, my external reality is a mirror reflection of my internal reality, then I undertake the process of self-transformation. And what is the process of self-transformation? This is what we can understand as mental purification, as the crystallization of every painful experience into a learning experience. Everything towards which I felt pain and resentment, I will transform this pain and resentment into understanding and forgiveness, understanding and empathy. And I do this via the medium of forgiveness. Every time I forgive a past painful experience, I crystallize it into a learning experience. Now, this is much easier said than done. And many of us will need a lifetime to undertake this process, to complete this process, which is ultimately a process of healing, a process of transforming our mental habits, transforming how we perceive and how we react to the world around us. And by transforming how we perceive and how we react to the world, we literally transform the world in front of us. And ultimately, I cannot transform you and you cannot transform me. I cannot transform people outside and people outside cannot transform me. What I do have power and what I can transform is myself. And if enough individuals undertake this self-transformation and manifest the state of ego consciousness. What is a state of ego consciousness? A state of unification with the one cosmic life, with the one life, with the one living being. Now, this is understanding that each living creation is a center of consciousness within the cosmic consciousness. Each human or each animal, each mineral, each plant is a unique aspect of the one cosmic life getting to know itself. And this one cosmic life is getting to know itself from infinite angles. However, ultimately, we are all one. And this is what we're going to see in a bit, the illusion of separation and how separation affects us and what is the illusion of separation. And then through this process of self-transformation, the process of transforming my mind, transforming how I perceive the world, I ultimately become the conscious creator of my destiny. I learn how to manipulate my internal, my mental energies, how I learn how to manipulate the mental cause to receive the desired physical effect. And thus at that point, life is no longer a punishment. Life becomes the most beautiful thing one can experience. Life is no longer a place of pain and suffering. Life becomes a place to marvel and wonder. And thus this is the ultimate purpose of man. This is why man has incarnated into this physical self. It is to awaken, to heal himself, to transform how he perceives the world, and to become a radiating energy of light and love, of unity between him and all fellow creation, because he realizes that he and his brother are one, that the separate self, the separate personality is simply an illusion in the development of consciousness. So this pyramid of development is simply to set the tone, or to give us a bit of background as we enter these different discussions. Does anyone have any questions related to any specific step of this pyramid?
Yes, yes. I have a question.
Yes, Brian, go ahead.
First.
Okay. I wanted to know, is there a possibility that you give us like how do you take the first step in from blindness to awakening? What is the first step?
So, Brian, I'm sorry, the line was cutting off a bit, but if I understood clearly, you were asking as to how does man go from the stage of blindness to the stage of awakening? Was that the question?
Yes, that was the question.
Okay. So this is actually the great dilemma which we have been confronted with. The reality is that I cannot awaken another individual, and another individual cannot awaken me. Awakening is something that happens internally. Through the pain and experience, through each event that one experiences, he gains certain understanding. At one point, after this pain and suffering, man realizes that if I just continue in the same cycle, I'm just going to experience more pain and suffering. So he takes a step back and he starts reflecting. Why did I experience pain? What did I do that led me to suffer? Where was my responsibility in the chain of events which led to the current pain and suffering? And it is only through this internal reflection, through this introspective analysis, where man can realize his true responsibility within the chain of cause and effect that he has experienced. Now, if we look at much of or the grand majority of regular life in urban society, if I may put it as that, we have to pay rent, we have to pay food, we have to pay water, we have to pay electricity. If I lose my job, I have very little time to sit back and reflect on what happened before I find another job. If I sit back and reflect, I will have no way to eat, I will have no shelter. Thus, this constant stimulation from one situation to another, without taking the time to reflect on what is happening, why has this happening, where is the mental cause to this physical effect, this leads us to running in this blind circle, or what we can call the circle of blindness. So awakening can only come when man takes the time to reflect on what has happened until now in his present incarnation. What has happened? Where has been my responsibility in regards to the events which I have experienced? And once man takes this time, it doesn't even need to be a great amount of time. It will depend on each individual. But once man takes the time to reflect on these past events and accepts responsibility for these past events, then is he truly on the path towards awakening. And awakening becomes only a matter of time. There are certain external influences which can help quicken the awakening process. If one practices meditation constantly for an extended period of time, he will realize many things. Mainly, he will realize his connection to the universe, and he will realize the lack of randomness present within the universe. Another way to quicken the awakening process can be the use of psychedelics. Plants such as magic mushrooms, ayahuasca, or acids such as LSD have played a huge role in the quickening and the awakening of mankind over the last centuries and aeons of time. So these are different aspects, different tools which one can use to realize his truth. But ultimately, each individual will awaken when his time has come. Does that answer your question, Brian? Brian?
I have a question.
Yes, it answers my question.
Okay, thank you. Dom, go ahead.
So basically my question is, so do you think that we're born in a society where the stage of blindness is like propagated on the people, and people are born in this blindness by the media's covering their eyes and all this? So would it be possible to be born in a society where the people are immediately given the tools for awakening, such as you mentioned?
Dom, this is an excellent question, and this is actually not only an excellent question, but an excellent realization. It is true that we are born in a society where blindness is encouraged. However, this is not the result of evil. This is the result of blindness itself. The media which blinds us, the politicians which blind us, they blind us because they themselves are blinded. And yes, it is most definitely possible, the same way that we are born in a society of which its main state is blindness, eventually we will have our children born into a society where awakening is part of the curriculum. And yes, we will be providing them with the tools, with the resources, with the understanding that they need to be able to undertake their process of self-transformation as efficiently as possible and to become the conscious creators of their destiny and live a life of love and understanding and peace within themselves and without. There's a book which you may find interesting, Don, and anyone else who may have asked himself this question. It is a book written by Aldous Huxley titled Island. Aldous Huxley wrote a book in early 1930s called A Brave New World. This book depicted a dystopian society, a society very similar to what we may be experiencing today. However, a few years before his death, 30 years after he wrote the initial book, he wrote the book titled Island. And this book depicts a society where the children are born into a state of awakening. And it can be a very interesting book because it gives us a whole new perspective. We think, man, it's impossible to live without capitalism. If it's not capitalism, it's communism. If it's not communism, it's socialism. But Island shows us a perspective which is of a complete different ballgame, of a completely different nature. And yes, as we transform ourselves, we will eventually reach this stage of society. Does that answer the question, Don?
Yeah, that's dope. That's very cool. Thanks.
Does anyone else have any interesting questions, interesting statements, or even thoughts in regards to this pyramid?
I have a quick question. So could we correlate each stage of the pyramid, like for example, blindness for like a third dimensional like mentality or like way of being, or third, like a 3D consciousness, and then like awakening would be like a 4D, self-transformation is like a 5D, and then like conscious creator would be like 6D and above. Could we like make those type of correlations?
Damn.
Vincent, that's a very, very interesting question. If I may ask, is this information, are you familiar with the Book of Ra, the Law of One?
I've heard of it, but I have not taken the time to read it yet, but I think I should.
Okay, well, I was simply asking because this concept is very much discussed in that book. But yes, ultimately, I mean, if we say 3D, 4D, 5D, 6D, these are words. No, these are words, the same as blindness, awakening, words from which we try to make sense out of what we have in front of us. But yes, ultimately, from blindness, man rises in consciousness to awakening. From awakening, a man rises in consciousness through this process of mental purification. And finally, through this process of mental purification, man rises in consciousness and becomes one with the Creator, one with Spirit, one with God, and thus the conscious creator of his destiny. And using the numbers is actually a very interesting way of making it even more relatable. So thank you for sharing that analogy as well, Vincent.
So you said the book was called The Law of One?
The Law of One, Book of Ra.
Okay, perfect. And so those are just two different names of the same book?
Exactly. It's the book is, it's a series of 5 books. These are conversations with a higher entity, which basically almost were downloaded into a human mind and explained from there. It's a very interesting book because it explains very clearly the law of love and how love is ultimately the force driving our universe. It is an interesting read.
I wanna ask the name of that book again. What is the name of, you said, the book of the Law of the One, or the Book of the Ra? Because I heard about the Book of the Ra, and I was keep studying about the Ra from like a very long time.
Okay, the book. Oh, sorry, Arslan, but yes, the Book of Ra that you're talking about is a book of a book which we relate to ancient Egyptian knowledge. I'm gonna send the name of the book in the chat so that everyone can have it there.
Thank you.
The Law of One.
No, definitely. Thank you so much.
Book of Ra, and I'm also going to add the other one from Aldous Huxley, which is extremely interesting, which I would recommend to absolutely everyone. Aldous Huxley Island. This will give you a very beautiful perception of how life could be. Does life have to be this system of basically mental jail? Is it possible to have a system much more developed?
So do you know the name of the author of The Law of One, the Book of Ra? Because I think there's like 2 different books when I Googled it.
The authors are almost anonymous. I think there's Carla Rupert, if I'm not mistaken. But what I could do is at the end of our webinar, on the group, on the Become the Conscious Creator of Your Destiny group, I'll post a link to the book so that you can find it, access it, and so that we have no misunderstandings. Does that sound good, Vince?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
Of course, Arslan. Any other questions in
Uh,
regards to this pyramid of development? Yes, Brian.
I was requesting that you also put for us the food we have said. That hope in our community.
I'm sorry, Brian, I could not hear you properly.
You told us about the foods. Is it the acid and some other ingredients that help in our community? So can you put them on the group, please?
Brian, would you mind writing the question in the chat? I'm sorry, I don't know if it's my connection or if it's just a lack of connection, but I can't hear that question.
Oh,
Write it in the chat, please. Is everyone hearing me correctly, clearly?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a little distortion, but yeah, more likely it's clear.
On the Book of Ra, I sent it in chat.
Okay, thank you, Dom. So Dom has sent us the link to the Book of Ra on in the chat. Any other questions in regards to the pyramid of development, to the different stages man undertakes? Is it clear for everyone?
I understand. So I just want to reiterate. I have a question. If man has many lives, and so the conscious creator stage can be obtained after over many lifetimes.
The conscious creator stage can definitely be obtained over many incarnations. I mean, the entire pyramid of development happens over multiple incarnations. It is understood that the life of an individual unit is not solely one physical incarnation. Physical incarnation is one aspect of the life of the individual unit of consciousness. So the aspect of becoming the conscious creator can be also referred to as initiation. It can be understood as initiation, as the unification between the personality and the one spirit, the one cosmic life. Does that answer the question, Dom?
Yeah, that's cool.
Brian
I
was
actually have a quick.
oh.
Oh, sorry. You can answer Brian's question first if you'd like.
So Brian was just asking if I could share the food I said helped awakening. So I'm going to write them in the chat. So we have magic mushrooms. We have ayahuasca. We have LSD. And there's many more, I'm certain, but I guess within these three, you can find one that is to your liking. Now,
anything that's like a psychedelic, basically.
Exactly, Vince. Thank you. Exactly. And ultimately, it's important to note that the psychedelic itself, just the psychedelic, is not what is going to awaken neither me, neither anyone. But the psychedelic is like a gateway. It opens the door, but then we still have to walk through the door. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes. But I definitely feel that the psychedelic definitely accelerates or catalyzes that experience.
No, definitely. Extremely accelerates the experience to a great degree, especially since, as you had said earlier, Dom, we live in a current society where blindness is the norm. Thus, the psychedelic kind of helps burst through the barriers, and it helps us see maybe a raw truth of life. But psychedelics are not necessary for awakening. I know many individuals who have awakened without the use of psychedelics. But if it's not psychedelics, then a meditation is probably the natural way to reach that stage. But psychedelics is definitely the great accelerator.
I also feel that there's also natural causes. So if an individual is going through a lifetime of general pain and suffering, I feel that these circumstances might eventually bring upon an awakening. So there's also, I feel, an awakening from that side of things, which is not necessarily looked upon or sought by that individual.
I agree. This would be you referring to an awakening that almost happens unconsciously. Am I right, Dom?
Yeah, that's exact.
Very cool. And yes, very true as well. Vince, you had a question earlier, no?
Yes. So I am curious because you guys are talking about how you need like multiple lifetimes or incarnations to like, I guess, reach that top of the pyramid. But what if you, since you already are armed with this knowledge of what we're learning about now, alchemy and all of that stuff, would it be possible to be able to just achieve that in the one incarnation that you're in right now?
Not only is that possible, Vince, that's exactly what every single individual who is in this group is going to do.
Yeah, bro, that's what I'm trying.
That's exactly what we're here to do. This is exactly why we're here to help guide this process. And ultimately, once the individual awakens, it's only a matter of time before he passes the threshold. But the process of self-transformation, without the right guidance or without the right information, it can feel like an almost hopeless process. So the main work of ReSourceMind has been to make the self-transformation process one that is relatable, understandable, and applicable easily and efficiently, to help the individual cross this threshold, confront his demons, transform his demons into his angels, and become an epitome of love, become one with the creator, become the conscious creator of his destiny. It will happen for every single individual who is taking the time, investing his time in this webinar today. Thank you for the question, Vince.
Yeah, of course.
And
that kind of brings up the point, because when you're talking about, you know, going from blindness to awakening, if you don't have that guidance, it feels like awakening, you can just, it's very easy to just feel complacent and stagnant. And I was thinking about, you know, if you're in the awakening stage, would it be possible to revert back to blindness?
Vince, that is an excellent question. And yes, as a matter of fact, it most definitely is. The reason being, I mean, once man realizes that he creates his own reality, that's a realization. But then keeping up that realization or manifesting his life around him while taking into consideration that realization is a whole different ballgame. And now what happens when, let's say we have this webinar right now, we have this discussion, everyone here, I'm very conscious of what I'm saying, you're conscious of what you're saying, we're conscious of these stages. We close the webinar, I go back downstairs and my wife starts screaming at me. And automatically I get back in to my undesirable habits, which were cultivated in times of blindness, and thus I react from a state of consciousness that is corresponding to blindness. And thus it's very easy to get back mixed up in it. And if ultimately the progress is not a straight line. This is something that we're going to be seeing in further webinars, the different laws of the cosmos. But there's the law of cyclicity, which says that everything manifests in circles. And the master is the one who transforms the circles of development into spirals of development. So this is something that we're going to be learning further on. But yes, so there's always this constant, it's almost like man's development can be likened to almost looking at the stock market, looking at an action in the stock market. You see that it's going up, down, but then it will always be ultimately going back up, or a good action will go back up and then go back down slightly, go back up higher. So this is another good analogy to understand how man's development is. But once man awakens, if he is brave enough to undertake the path of self-transformation, then ultimately he will never go back to blindness. Because the hard thing is awakening, but remaining bounded by or enslaved to your old habits, the habits that you cultivated in times of blindness. And this is when it's almost like, I don't even want the red pill. I wish I would have just taken the blue pill. But once man takes the red pill and then also undertakes the path of self-transformation, then does he get to experience the red pill in all its beauty, in all its splendor. Does that make sense, Vince?
Yes, definitely.
Excellent. Do we have any other questions in regards to the pyramid? Everything clear?
Yes, everything is clear.
Thank you, Arslan. Okay, so from here we're going to move on. We'll be displaying different quotes and different questions just to get some discussion going. So you are very much urged to express your opinion, your understanding of the quote so that we can discuss it together. So ultimately, we're working here as a team. If we're 10 individuals, then we're going to arrive at an answer at the end, which engulfs the opinions of all 10 individuals and enables us to find a reality within the reality itself. Thus, our first quote, man in his blindness is quite satisfied with himself, yet dislikes his external circumstances and situations. And we can ask ourselves, why is this man blind? Why is the man who is satisfied with himself yet dislikes his external circumstances and situations blind? What do you think?
Placence.
I'm sorry, Dom and Arslan, you spoke at the same time.
I'll express later, so I'm gonna listen first.
Okay,
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Arslan. I think I cut you off.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, actually, long time ago, I was reading a book about 88 secret codes of power and lead, and that was written by Daniel Marcus. In that book, they actually blame everything towards the elite, because the elite was trying to use human being as a human mechanic, as a machine. So, and of course, if the people read about the book Think and Grow Rich, and if they go deep down in the history of Andrew Carnegie, Andrew Carnegie used the extensive force against the human being to use them as a machine, and in fact, he actually bought the uh, so many people, like a private army, against those people who was the workers and all that. And I believe this is the one reason, but I'm not sure. I'm just discuss. I also wants to know what the people think about that, because somehow, somewhere, I feel like the human being is not a human being. Like if you go outside to the to what I'm gonna call it, it's like a weekend nights or something. You see the man and the woman. They are actually both looking to each other with a different way, not as a human being, not as a woman, as our friends or as our fellow human beings, but they are actually become what I'm gonna call it. They actually become something different. I mean, like I don't have the words to explain about those about what they are looking at, but I believe sometimes somebody somewhere has the knowledge, wants to hide that knowledge with their consensus, and actually wants us to be just a machines. That's my one concern. So let's just listen to
Well, that's a
Bro, I
very
agree.
Arslan, that's a very interesting perspective, and especially the aspect of Andrew Carnegie. We can look at it from this side as well. If Andrew Carnegie is trying to enslave human population or use human population as machines, that would have meant that Andrew Carnegie was still in his stage of blindness. Why do I say that? Even though one could be extremely smart and have great knowledge, but still be at the stage of blindness. And why is that? Because in his stage of blindness, man thinks that if he wins and his neighbor loses, he thinks that that's actually a win, not realizing that the law of rhythm is in constant effect, and whatever he emits, he receives, and that if he hurts, a fellow self, a fellow human, he is hurting himself because he and this fellow human are one. And thus, even today, this great enslavement which we may perceive is not the result of evil forces. It is the result of ignorant forces. Forces whom believe that by them holding power over the people, that they believe this is true power, not realizing that if their people are enslaved, it means they are enslaved just as much. They and the people are one. And this is why even the minds who have contributed so much to enslave us as a species are deserving of forgiveness, because those individual creations are a reflection of us. We are them. We are Bill Gates. We are Elon Musk. We are all of these people who we might place as culprits for what has happened. But these people are simply acting from the stage of ignorance, from the stage of blindness. And thus, the true service that we can do to these people and to humanity is to forgive them and to perceive them as a unique aspect of the one cosmic life of us. Does that make sense, Arslan?
That is right. That's absolutely true. Yeah, because I believe, as you said, like about Andrew Carnegie, in his last days of his life, he was actually cut it off from everything, and he had so many regrets. So actually, when he was working and he was a king of the steel industry, he was not awakened. That's for sure. So that's 100% true what you said.
And that's amazing. It's amazing what you comment here at the end of his life, because it might have very well been that at the end of that incarnation, Andrew Carnegie awakened. And who knows in which human form Andrew Carnegie has reincarnated in since. Dom, you were going to mention something related to why is this man blind? The man who is satisfied with himself yet dislikes his external situation. Why is he blind?
Well, I kind of agree with Arslan. I see where he's coming from with this elite controlling the people, and just bring it more up to date today, where that now we still see that it's going on right now. And so I feel that, as you mentioned, that there's a rebound or a cycle that takes place. So I think that what this means is that we're getting near the end of this cycle, where we're getting at the point where the rebound's taking place and this elite is going down. So that was potentially a comment I wanted to make.
Well, thank you. That is definitely an interesting analysis, because, and yes, I definitely agree with you, because as we have experienced the darkest side, eventually from the darkness must come the light. And it's important, what the law of rhythm also tells us is that the negative always precedes the positive. For instance, darkness will always precede light. War will always precede peace. Hate will always precede love. Before I can learn how to love, I must learn how to hate. Before I learn what is joy, I must learn what is pain. And thus, having learned and experienced what is blindness, it means that we are now due to experience the opposite polarity. Anyone else who has an insight in regards to this quote? Man being satisfied with himself, thinking that he is great, yet dislikes his external world. Why is this man blind?
I think it comes down to the fact that he thinks that all his external circumstances are outside of himself, meaning that he's placing the blame on something else rather than looking within and looking inward and seeing what going on with himself is causing those external circumstances to occur.
I agree with you, Vincent. I believe that was extremely well said and extremely well explained. Extremely well explained. Exactly. And man believing that he himself is doing great while he hates his external life is the epitome of blindness. Why? Because his external situation is the exact mirror reflection of his internal situation. And as Vincent said, it's much easier to place the blame on external circumstances. No, I mean, it's much easier, and I feel less pain thinking that my current situation is because of this person and that situation and X and Y, than actually accepting that if I am unhappy, it's unhappy because I have manifested this reality of unhappiness. If I am poor, it's not because of bad luck, it's because I have manifested this reality of poverty. If I am angry, it's not because anyone else is angering me, it's because I have manifested this reality of anger. Thank you very much for sharing that, Vincent. Does anyone have any other insights towards this question? Why is this man blind? Or should we look at the next question? I think Vincent's. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I have a quick question, and this is for Arslan. I wanted to know the name of that book that he mentioned earlier, so because it sounded really interesting, I wanted to look into that book.
Could you write it? Could you write it in the chat, Arslan, so that we can all have it?
I'm gonna write it down. It's actually a very fascinating book, and it's also gonna explain you what was it has like what president belongs to what secret order and what was that, because every code is I'm gonna put it down there over here.
Thank you, Arslan.
88.
So I think in regards to this question, I think truth be told, Vince said it perfectly, and we had excellent insights from Arslan and Dom. And thus, we can move to the next question, which would be that how can this man, this blind man, find his sight? What is the one action, the one internal action, which would allow this blind man to find his sight, to see again? What do you guys think? Could it be that the one action which would allow the blind man to find his sight is to take responsibility for what has happened from day one in which he has incarnated until today? Would that be a solution?
A man in his blindness is quite satisfied with himself, yet dislikes external circumstances.
So can we reiterate the question?
So how can the blind man, the blind man, the one who is satisfied with himself, yet he dislikes his external situation, how can this blind man find his sight, or how can this blind man awaken?
Well, I think that goes into kind of what I said earlier about the fact that he needs to look within and see what's going on with himself, like doing things like meditation, self-reflection, basically doing that.
And doing these things, what will he realize, Vince?
Depending on if he's open and receptive to realizing that, hey, you know what, maybe the reason why these external circumstances are happening to me is because maybe there's something going on with me. Maybe I'm the problem. And so, the first step is acceptance. And then once you realize that, then you can move forward and try to figure out how you can make changes, either by seeking help from someone else or, doing your own research and just figuring out what the steps you can take to fix the problems that lead to you having those external circumstances happen to you in the first place.
Thank you for that insight, Vincent. Extremely interesting perspective, and I would totally agree with you. Dom, you're going to say something as well?
Yeah, well, I was going to say that I feel that because man is born into the state of blindness, as I had mentioned earlier, I feel that it's external circumstances themselves that will bring upon the awakening. So through extreme pain and suffering, maybe through relationships, maybe
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I'm
Yep.
sorry, I got disconnected for just a moment. Dom, you were in the middle. You were in the middle of a statement, and I'm sorry I got cut off. I couldn't hear the rest of it. Would you mind reiterating?
Yeah, I just feel that because man is often born into the state of blindness,
Mhm.
find sight by accident. So through pain and suffering, so it could be relationships, business, family, romantic. Man finds sight by accident, by stumbling upon pain and suffering. So it could be completely accidental. How can this man find his sight? Completely accidentally.
Though I agree with what you mean. It could be unconscious, but would it really be accidental? Because accidental would that mean saying it almost by luck?
No, but for this man, for this individual man who perceives the universe and is quite satisfied with himself, he would see it as an accident. He would see it as negative chance, as the universe being negative towards his person. Hence, I feel that at some level, before he awakens, yes, for him it would be an accident.
Okay, I see what you mean, and I agree. And Amin has actually sent a message with a very interesting statement. He says, when a painful experience occurs which exceeds the threshold or the limit of pain, and then a man awakens. When he cannot bear that pain, he says that then a man awakens. And this goes, I think, very much in relation to what Dom is saying, from where external situation to external situation leads to ultimately a bundle of pain, which forces man to do what Vincent said, and which is to take that step back, reflect on himself, an introspective analysis, and take responsibility and find out where he has erred in his actions. So I think this is an excellent combination of all the answers, and I really appreciate everyone who has provided this answer. I think we have a very complete answer. Does anyone else have anything else that they would like to add? Should we move on to the next question?
Yes. We learned something in Kundalini Yoga that was it's an ancient practice. I think everyone know about that.
Mm-hmm.
It's also how the man is going to find the site. The most important thing and the first fundament they actually teaches to the people, and it's also taught in a uh, uh, what is this called? Chinese Shaolin temple, and in the monk yoga, it's also been taught. And they said it's a very one simple quote. He said, "Stop, um, stop serving the pleasures. Any pleasure regarding food, regarding what you see, regarding because as he said about the you have to get the painful experience and all that to just break these cycles. Um, I think actually that is the same thing. You do it to yourself. So once if a human being is going to break the cycle of the pleasure, because we are so much into those things, like what we eat, we breathe. We want to breathe the things where the good thing smells. We want to eat the food which is gonna satisfy the pleasure. Of course, it's not gonna helpful for our health, definitely. And the third thing is that what we think, because sometimes the people they go to a bed and they want to think something, or they are just putting their focus on and this happened to me so many times. uh, I'm also the example of that. Sometimes
Elite are they were made aware of this point and they've been therefore controlling the pleasures of the population by enhancing the food, the entertainment, and everything to make it
every single thing, yeah.
more attractive, to make it more attractive. Everything is made more attractive, from food to clothes to sex. Everything is made more attractive through the media industry.
That's right. Yep.
And we're left
Hence, it's much more
consuming.
difficult to resist these pleasures And therefore, to go along your point, it's much more difficult to awaken naturally to a focus, because to resist those pleasures from the true self is difficult if you've been conditioned by this society.
That's right. Yeah.
And I think
Was boost up in that situation, but some people cannot even uh, realize on that time. So what was going on and how to handle that, because the great powers comes with the great responsibility, and if people don't know how
I
to
agree. I agree.
that, yeah,
There's actually a book that mentions that there's these people that they go through the awakening process, this initiation to awakening, and if they're not ready to take up on this initiation to awakening, the great hardships, the great mental energies that are unleashed are impossible to resist mentally on the lower planes. Hence,
yeah,
you cannot, if you're not ready for this awakening, you cannot potentially resist its impact on your entity, and then therefore crumble mentally. And we see
yes.
people of schizophrenia and other crazy side effects.
Mhm. Could you share the name of that book?
Yeah, it's called Initiation by Elizabeth Heitch. In this chat.
this is the book I would also personally most recommend for everyone here to start with. If you're from all the books that we have talked about, initiation gives you a great insight into what to expect within this process of self-transformation. A very eye-opening book, I would say. Thank you for sharing that, Dom. Should we move on to the next quote? I think we've discussed this quote in great length. I think we've understood the reality of this quote. Does anyone have any final questions regarding to this, or should we move on? Okay then. So the purification of man's mental activity is accomplished through the crystallization of painful experiences into learning experiences. The crystallization is complete when forgiveness is achieved. So what is the benefit of mental purification, of self-transformation? What do you guys think?
Well, I think a fundamental part of it is the fact that, you know, you're able to move past that lower like level or like lower state of like being or thinking, because in order to transcend to a higher state of being, you can't bring in like things like trauma and negativity, all that emotional baggage. And so going through mental purification, it's allowing you to heal from that and to help you process that, so that way you're able to move forward from it and not dwell on it anymore and not take it with you when you transcend into those higher states of being.
Very well said, my dear Vince. Ultimately, the mind works in the same way as the mental muscle can be related to work in the same way as a physical muscle. How does the physical muscle work? Through habit and repetition. And thus, how does the mind work? Through habit and repetition. And thus, we create mental habits. Our mental activity is dictated by mental habits. And these mental habits, most of them, if not all of them, were cultivated in our times of blindness. So once I awaken to cross the threshold and to become the conscious creator of my destiny, I need to transform the undesirable, negative, self-limiting mental habit into its opposite, desirable, positive, self-empowering mental habit. What happens when man awakens and then he finds different law of attraction techniques? He starts using that, but he doesn't undertake the process of mental purification. What happens as the awakened man attempts to use law of attraction without going through self-transformation? What do you guys think happens?
I think that's what I was mentioning a bit earlier with initiation. What happens is that if the individual is not ready, well, the law of attraction can either go both ways. Either it won't work, or if it's used, it can be used for ends of self self-propelling forwards into the system. So therefore, it can also be used in a negative way for the self.
And not only is that it can be used in a negative way, but ultimately the law of attraction, how it works is that what you emit, you attract. So if my mental activity is still dictated by undesirable mental habits due to the painful experiences which have not been crystallized into learning experiences, then even with whatever law of attraction techniques, I still continue attracting the same undesirable events due to my undesirable mental activity. Does that make sense to everyone?
Perfect explanation. That's perfect explanation. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Exactly.
Well, perfect then, because this is where, I mean, it's great for man to awaken, but man awakening does not mean that he gets to create heaven automatically. For man to create heaven within and without, for man to create heaven without, he needs to create heaven within. And to create heaven within, he needs to, as Vincent and Dom said earlier, let go of these painful traumas. And how does one let go of these painful traumas? It's not by forgetting them, it's by forgiving them. And once he forgives them, then he can forget them, because then they no longer disrupt his mental activity. He is no longer impacted, let's say, and often the trauma is not automatically realized. For instance, if my father beat me as a child, it does not mean that I am going to beat my child. Yet it could be that I have constant problems with figures of authority. Why? Because I saw my father as a figure of authority and he abused me. And thus, or I perceived it as him abusing me. And thus, when I am interacting with other figures of authority, be it a police officer, be it a teacher, be it a boss, I may always feel like they are abusing, and thus always be perceiving from that standpoint. Until I heal the initial trauma which cultivated this undesirable mental habit, then I will always indulge in the same undesirable mental activity due to the undesirable mental habit. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what happens actually in the society. What happens is that the father figure, as a king or a governor, and oftentimes takes the role of a fascist. So when the child grows into the real world, is more compelled to react as a victim to this government and to this society.
But is this the fault of the father?
No, I don't think so.
And why is it not the fault of the father?
Because the father is acting upon his blindness.
Exactly. The father is acting from his own state of consciousness. There is a chain of cause and effect which led the father to acting in the only way that he could act, which was from that stage of blindness. Now, we have a choice. We can either break the cycle or continue the cycle. But just because I don't hit my child does not mean I have broken the cycle. Breaking the cycle would be forgiving my father for what had happened, understanding that he was doing the best from his state of consciousness, and thus recreating not only my relationship with my father, but recreating my relationship with all figures of authority. This would break the cycle definitively, and when I am due to have my child, I would have a completely different relationship with my child than the one I had with my father. We can almost see it as two being the opposites of the same thing. The relationship between me and my father being the negative pole, and the relationship between me and my son displaying the positive pole. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. And thus, let's look at this, or I'm pretty sure we already spoke of why do I need to revisit these painful experiences? Because ultimately, a lot of people ask, well, if those painful experiences happened in the past, why do I need to bring them back up and to forgive them? Can't I just forget about them? And ultimately, this is what we talked earlier of how the law of attraction works. And if I don't heal the trauma, then the trauma will keep repeating and repeating and repeating in all types of forms and shapes until I revisit this initial trauma. and heal that initial trauma. So let's move to the last question. This one is interesting. How can I forgive someone who has hurt me? So how can I forgive my father for abusing me or for beating me? This is something which seems so strong. How can I forgive someone who has hurt me this much? What do you guys think?
I think that on this plane, on the emotional plane where we all talk, it's very hard for us to admit openly that we are ready to forgive these high levels of trauma, and that forgiveness occurs on the inside because we're supposed to communicate these things.
And so when does forgiveness occur on the inside, Dom? What is the defining lead between judgment and forgiveness? From your own personal experience.
I feel forgiveness also ties in with acceptance. Acceptance that this happened for a purpose. Because if everything is cause and effect, then everything happened for a purpose to make you who you are today.
That's very interesting. The concept of acceptance is very interesting when we link it with forgiveness. What about the concept of empathy? How do you think we can link the concept of empathy to forgiveness?
Understanding the other person's distortions, their emotional and mental distortions,
their perspective.
Yes.
Empathy means thinking from his side.
I'm sorry, Amin, I couldn't
Hello?
hear you properly. Yes.
Empathy means thinking from father's side.
Exactly.
What
Thinking
made?
from,
Okay.
Exactly. Thinking from the perspective of the other self involved, and realizing that if this happened, it happened because I manifested this into my reality, no matter what situation. And this is, there are more abstract concepts which we can look at. For instance, when a child gets abused, you would say, well, why did this child, how did this child who is still not even speaking, how did a child manifest that into his reality? But ultimately, the child is the personality, and the force behind the personality is the spirit. And spirit is the one who decided which incarnation. Spirit can see everything without the distortion of time and space. Therefore, if I incarnated into a situation where I was abused as a 2-year-old with my father, it is ultimately because, as Dom said, there was a purpose to that. And I incarnated into that situation for a purpose. And now this can seem like a very cold way of... I'm sorry?
For a learning experience.
Exactly.
Yeah, I understand.
And it can seem like a very cold way to look at things. But ultimately, by looking at it from a bird's eye perspective, instead of looking at the situation from the perspective of my separate self, of my separate personality, looking at the situation from a bird's eye perspective, from a bird flying on top, or from the eternal spirit, from the perspective of what we can understand as God. God who knows all, who understands all, or the infinite potential of everything. Looking at it from that perspective, I realized that, again, everything happens for a reason. There is always a cause to every effect, and there is always an effect to every cause. Now, sometimes, especially when I'm looking at an external individual, someone else besides me, I'm not in the individual's mind. Thus, I cannot... it is very hard for me to realize what is the mental cause on his end which led him to committing this external effect. But where I can find comfort is in the fact that there always is a cause previous to every effect, even though I may not be aware of what is the cause. But I know that there is a cause. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yes, I think I agree also, and I think that no matter how close we could get find a potential cause for these things, because of the fly effect or the ripple effect that we, because water ripples so far, we can't necessarily identify the exact source.
I agree. Definitely agree, Dom. I mean, you were saying something?
But as you said that the child is not speaking, but how he manifested. Uh, but I don't understand the concept you talked. That the spirit. I don't understand that.
So,
I think yo, can I try and
yeah, go ahead, Dom.
what I understood was that the child might not have asked for this situation and is born into this situation. However, because of the situation, it's learned experience. For example, the father figure taking this position upon the child might grow up and utilize this experience to use it to serve the rest of humanity and help all other population, hence bringing positive impact to the rest of humanity, this negative experience.
I 100% agree with Dom. I mean, does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
No, actually, I can hear that some disturbance, connection problem. I think.
Oh, Dom, would you like to repeat, or would you like me to summarize what you?
Yeah.
Okay, what Dom was saying is that ultimately, even though whatever happened to the 2-year-old may have felt like something difficult and something painful, it happened for a purpose, and this purpose could very well be the child forgiving the father, empathizing with every other individual who has been abused by a figure of authority, and spreading infinite love, infinite understanding, and infinite forgiveness to not only the individuals who have suffered from the abuse, but to the abuser himself. And thus, from that small traumatic event, create a huge ripple effect of positivity, of love and understanding. Does that make sense? I mean, did I summarize that pretty much, Tom?
Spot on.
So you're saying that it's a learning experience for the child.
Exactly. A learning, exactly. It's a painful experience which once transformed, once crystallized into a learning experience, becomes a learning experience which can have immense potential for positive change, for healing, for love, and for forgiveness.
Okay, I agree. But in the first place, how did this experience manifested?
Okay. Well, this.
Blindness.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dom.
Through the father's blindness, the father has not awakened, hence propagating his cycle of blindness, repeating his habits of negative toxicity, and propagating this onto his child, his offspring. It's the child that will break off the cycle.
Dom said it very well. Does that answer your question, Amin?
Right.
So other people's so
I mean, we have a problem hearing you.
I mean, if the father's thoughts and emotions can manifest in child's experience, is that Dom said?
Okay, so
Can you hear
there's,
me?
yes, there's in every the law of gender, I mean, is manifest in everything in the universe. And this is something we'll be looking at afterwards, but this might help answer your question. This is manifest also in the mind of man. His conscious mind is what could be understood as the masculine principle, the attention. And the subconscious mind is what could be understood as the feminine principle, desire. What happens is that, for instance, with a young child, his conscious mind is developed very little. Thus, his me, what creates his experience, is very much directed or influenced by the conscious mind of other individuals. And this keeps happening not only for the 2-year-old child. This is blatant to see in the case of a baby, but this is also something that we can see in society itself. Most people do not realize their power of attention, and thus their attention is constantly being stimulated by other individuals. Other individuals stimulate their attention, or other external stimulation is what leads their attention. And thus
I also think I completely agree with that, and I also want to make a little connection here with the medias and how they are aware of that, and they're using that power of attention within the individual to attract an individual's attention towards the source of energy that's not necessarily, as we could say, positive.
Exactly, exactly. And this is
Um,
how
I
this
would
is
like
how.
to,
Uh-huh.
yeah, I would like to add something on it. Uh, I mean, the one thing is very important. Uh, please. The one thing is very important, and that is if an extremely loving father to their kids, that's also the same effect. It's not a very good effect to the kid. So take the example for example, like the son of the warriors, like back in the days in the emperors, they actually teach their kids in a hard way because they want them to learn what's coming up next, what kind of a scenarios, what kind of a situations he is going to face in his life. Like I grew up in a very abusive atmosphere. Like I have so many complaints with my father, with my mother, because I had that complaint that they do not understand me. Like what I was thinking, what my concern was. Uh, but yeah, I mean, my concern was because I was trying to become an engineer, or I was trying to become a doctor or something, and then the parents push you, oh no, you don't have to become a doctor, you have to become this. But that's what the mistakes are. So either in this situation, the both sides are actually wrong. The father is trying to discipline the kid, and because he believe there is going to be the worst waiting for him if he do not discipline his son. And the son believe like, oh, the father is actually having some kind of a frustration or something. But yeah, the culture where I am from is the eastern side of the globe. Over there, this culture is very active, and it's very hard to just remove this culture from that side, because these people have a mental programming. And that mental programming, I mean, like, we are just 10 people sitting down here and we're just talking about that, and we still have a problem to just breaking the cycles of hundreds of people or thousands of people. So you can imagine how hard it's going to be for a person or a group of people who has to break that cycle on a national level. That's very hard. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's going to be eventually learning learning from next generation. Like when I got my baby boy like a month ago, and when I get my baby boy, like every single baby in this world, I pray for them, I wish them a good luck, and I feel their pain. And I sometimes I feel so pain about those kids who doesn't even have the parents, you know. So that's how. And I had a very abusive father, abusive mother. So I mean, because I need to stop it. It's whatever happened to me, it's not gonna happen to someone else.
Well,
This
Arslan,
kind of analogy.
exactly with that perspective is how you are breaking the cycle. And I understand what you mean when you're saying that on a national level, it's hard to see everyone. But it's important to realize that often there's one small effect which causes, as Dom said earlier, a constant ripple effect. And ultimately, this ripple effect can only lead towards one place, towards the general awakening of mankind. Ultimately, if this takes 1,000,000 years or if this takes 100 years, will depend on the effort we do, but not on the effort we do in transforming other people, and on the effort we put in transforming ourselves. As we transform ourselves, we transform our layer of reality. Each one is entitled to his
That's
own
right.
layer of reality. After enough people transform their layer of reality, we will see a completely different world. We will see a completely different society. What today seems impossible, tomorrow will be nothing.
That's right. Yep.
I I want to point out that this ripple effect or this initiation, this awakening that everyone's undergoing here and everywhere, this can very much be compared to the virus that's also undergoing. This virus is propagating at speeds, or apparently is. Well, this awakening is the exact same. It's every individual is awakening like this and like this. And we could see that the soap for the virus, washing the hands, would be the medias. And if you keep watching the medias and keep watching the mainstream theory of things, that's how you avoid awakening. That's how you avoid this awakening thing.
I completely agree with what Dom is saying. And yes, definitely and this goes back to what Arslan was saying earlier, as long as we're constantly looking for external stimulation and looking for something to distract ourselves with, then we'll always be distracted and we'll never have time to find our truth. Once we take the time to reflect, to analyze, and to find the truth that is lying there waiting for us to awaken within ourselves, then and only then can we start the transformation process. And again, it's important to realize that even though there are billions of people in the universe, I do not need billions of people to transform. I only need to transform myself. And then naturally, the ripple effect, the same as how the virus propagates, awakening propagates, exactly how Dom said it. Are there any other questions in regards to this quote, the crystallization of experience? We have there were a few other quotes that we have, but we've already exceeded to an hour and a half. So I think it would be ideal if we leave these quotes to the next webinar. What do you guys think?
Absolutely.
Yeah, since we've already exceeded to an hour and a half. So does anyone have any final questions in regards to what has been discussed today and what will be discussed further along the line?
I'm just curious because I see you're recording this webinar. So are we going to be able to watch, are we going to be able to like access this video and watch it back later?
Most definitely, Vince. Most definitely. I will share this webinar to everyone who has attended here. Okay, and we'll find a way to optimize this sharing by next session. Did you guys enjoy this webinar? Is this something that you would like to participate in the future? Did you find it helpful?
Yes.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah,
It's interesting to have a chance to speak with people that you don't really know who their personalities are, but they exist on this planet.
Definitely interesting.
Hello.
Yes, I mean.
Okay. Is there any techniques or methods to forgive our past experiences or people? Daily we have to practice this. Sometimes even I forgive that situation experience, still it pop up like an anxiety. Why is this happening?
Okay, it's important to realize that the process of forgiveness is not exactly something that happens just in one moment. It happens, so first I realize my responsibility for the event that happened. Then I realize my responsibility. Then I start to look at the perspective of the other self involved, the other individual involved. Then I understand the perspective of the other individual involved. But then sometimes I will still be stimulated either by thoughts or by external aspects, which will remind me of the original situation. And for a moment, I will forget the perspective of the other self. And this is where the technique of mental transmutation comes in. And this technique ultimately is the one which allows you to complete the forgiveness process. This is the part where you strengthen the new perception of forgiveness towards the certain event. Does that make sense?
Yes. From where I can learn about that.
Okay,
I studied some technique like writing letter to that person by forgiving and blessing him, like that, and also the writing the painful experiences, then burning that paper into ashes, like that. Is that works?
These are all very good techniques for the forgiveness process. The mental transmutation technique, unfortunately, is a technique that we cannot exactly write down because it's a technique that happens on the mental plane. Uh, to understand the mental transmutation technique, what is mental transmutation? Mental transmutation is the process of changing a state of mind from one opposite to the other. So from one polarity to the other. Before we even get to the transmutation technique, it's important to realize that there's the law of opposites, which is manifest within everything in the cosmos. And what is the law of opposites? It means that everything has its opposite. Every truth is but a half truth. Every positive has its negative. And this we can see on the physical plane, the sun and the moon, hot and cold, day and night. So one cannot exist without the other. And this is also valid on the mental plane, so within the mental states of man. So there we can see hate and love. These are opposites of the same thing. Different in degree, same in kind. Fear, courage. Anxiety, serenity. Hostility, peace. So these are opposite states of mind. At all times, they both exist. So at all times, I have the possibility of manifesting a mental state of love or a mental state of hate. Now, what this also means is that when I'm manifesting a mental state of hate, the state of love is also there existing, but in the unmanifest state. Thus, the technique of mental transmutation is basically switching the state that is being manifested. So instead of having the state of hate being manifested, bringing into manifestation the state of love. And this is done through a 3-step process. We could talk of this more in the next webinar. If you really want a full picture to understand how to use this process correctly, what I would most recommend is one of the self-transformation packages that ReSourceMind offers. Within the masterclass, those techniques are properly explained, and you have the visual support. And more than just the visual support, you have the entire context. So it's difficult to even apply mental transmutation when we still don't have a complete understanding or a complete grasp of the law of opposites, the law of rhythm, how mental states manifest, the principle of vibration, the principles of cause and effect. So these are all things that with time we will learn, or the accelerated way to learn them in a complete package is through one of the self-transformation packages. Okay, but we will touch the power of attention. We were going to touch it today, but we did exceed our time. We're going to touch the power of attention and how attention can be used, retrained with mental transmutation in our next webinar. Okay, Amin? So does anyone else have any other questions in regards to what we saw today, in regards to the self-transformation process?
I have a really quick question. So I was wondering if in the future webinars you're going to go over, because you're talking about like mental transformation, stuff like that. I know a key technique that is utilized for that is meditation. So are you going to give us like techniques on how for us to be able to like meditate better, to like not allow like intruding thoughts to like impede on like our meditation process and stuff like that?
Well, Vince, meditation is very interesting. Now, do you spend your entire day meditating?
I think in a sense, yes, because when you talk about like being more mindful of like your actions and things that you're doing, but I'm talking about in terms of like like meditation as we all know it, like when we all think of meditation, just us sitting in a quiet place and just, you know, focusing on your breathing and stuff like that. Because when I try to meditate, when I try to like put intention, meditate with intention, I have difficulty with dealing with like intrusive thoughts, or like when, like for example, when I'm thinking about, oh, don't think about this, because I'm thinking about don't think about it, I end up thinking about it. Does that make sense?
That definitely makes sense. And what I can say is that if you're already sitting down, breathing with your eyes closed, then you're already meditating. The techniques which I'm going to be presenting to you within the coming weeks are techniques that will allow you to remain in a state of meditation throughout your day as you are participating in your activities. Instead of being immersed with your activities, you will be the puppeteer, moving your puppet of personality as you please. Instead of being perceiving and reacting from the plane of the puppet, you'll be perceiving and reacting from the plane of the puppeteer. In other words, you'll become a mover instead of a pawn. Does that make sense to you, Vince?
Definitely. I'm actually really looking forward to that, because when you mentioned about transitioning from, you know, being like feeling like you're the one that's being controlled to being the one that's in control, that is exactly the best way to put it. And that's exactly what I'm interested in learning more about.
Perfect. And this is exactly what you're going to achieve, Vince. This is exactly just by you focusing your attention on that, you've been directed here, and you will be directed towards your complete self-transformation. Does anyone else have any, of course, does anyone else have any other questions before we close?
Okay, yes, I have.
Yes, I mean.
Okay, when I sit usually, by default my thoughts is actually negative thoughts by default if I'm not conscious. Okay, when I feel like hate, feelings like hate, enmity, like that, how can I switch immediately to positivity?
This is an,
I
this
mean,
is an, yes,
you understand? Okay.
I understand your question, Amin. This is an excellent question, and this is exactly the process of mental transmutation. On the page,
Okay.
I'm gonna on the group. We have a Facebook community, which I invite you guys to join, where we're always sharing information, we're discussing. It's called "Become the Conscious Creator of Your Destiny: The Art of Mental Alchemy." As we close up here, I'm going to post I'm going to share a post which you might find in previous posts, which is a summary of the mental transmutation technique. And this can help guide you in the meantime until we can get the full picture. Okay. But through the mental transmutation technique, you can transform any state of mind from one pole to the other. Now, you cannot transform fear into love or hate into courage, because these are not opposites of the same thing. The same way that you can't transform water into fire, but you can transform water from a state of ice to a state of gas. And in the same way, you can transform state of hate to a state of love, because they are one and the same, opposites of the same thing, same in kind, different in degree. Does that answer your question, Amin?
Yes.
So just to comment on that, I feel like it would be super helpful to identify our current states. For example, like my current state under love, this is how I think, this is how I am, this is who I talk to, and then identify my current state under hate, and do this for each of the states. Then if I do this, would this not be ideal for me to progress from then on?
This will be the most ideal. This is actually the very first step of mental transmutation, which is self-observation. How can I transform a mental state if I'm not even aware of the mental state? How can I transform a state of hate to a state of love if I'm not even aware this is a state of hate? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so exactly. So for my personal person, I'd have to identify myself in each of those states.
Exactly. And this is done through self-analysis, introspection, and just thinking, how do I feel in relation to this? What do I think in relation to this?
I was reading earlier on the ReSourceMind page that there's this diagnostic, and everything can assess my state, or can help me assess or direct me in this assessment. Can you elaborate a little?
Most definitely. On the ReSourceMind, one of the aspects of ReSourceMind is what we call the report, or the Golden Mind report. And it works on the same way. How can I transform a mental habit if I'm not aware of the mental habit? So one of the key features of the self-transformation packages is the Golden Mind Report, which is the individual answers a questionnaire. The questionnaire is based on cold responses, so from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And then the results are compiled. And how the system works is that for every mind, for every individual, there are 5 dimensions of personality. And for every one of these 5 dimensions of personality, there are 6 facets. 6 facets which each have a negative and a positive polarity. So through the questionnaire, the individual is able to relate, you're able to relate your degree of polarization towards either the negative or towards the positive, or the undesirable or the desirable for every mental habit. Ultimately, the self-transformation process, if man transforms these 30 facets of his character to emanate a positive, desirable mental habit, this is the completion of his self-transformation process. By transforming his mental habits, he will have transformed himself. He will become the conscious creator of his destiny. So this is a key feature of the self-transformation packages which ReSourceMind offer. You can find those on the ReSourceMind website, www.resourcemind.org. You'll find a lot of information. You'll find information about mental alchemy. You'll find articles which will give you great insight in regards to this process of self-transformation. And so I can only recommend you guys to check it out and to dig on your own and to find your research. And you will find many tools which can help you along this path. Any other questions, or does that answer your question, Don?
Yeah, well, if there's no other questions, I think that's just awesome. I knew that I had to assess my current states in some way. And I'm right now as we speak, and I'm seeing this diagnostic thing with all these little boxes and this evaluation system. And I think that's going to be extremely helpful to assess my current states. And I think that by doing this, I'll be able to progress much quicker on my self-transformation journey. So thanks for that.
I'm happy to hear that. This is exactly why this diagnostic was created. It took us it was quite some work to prepare the diagnostic and the report, so that not only to make this information precise, but to make it relatable. So there are excellent graphs which have been designed by top class designers, and which allow really a complete understanding of one's current mental complex. Any final questions, guys?
Nothing. It's very informative. I learned a lot of things today. Thank you so much for that.
Well, I'm happy to hear that, Arslan. I equally learned quite a lot, and I very much enjoyed discussing with each and every single one of you. And again, I think as we grow this, I can only recommend you guys to suggest to your friends, invite your friends into the Facebook community. And the more traction we create, the more people we have, the more individuals who commit to their self-transformation process and who create the state of heaven within and without, the faster we will reach this ideal society, which Aldous Huxley described in his book, The Island. Feel free to follow us on Instagram, on Facebook, on YouTube. We're always posting content which you might find interesting, especially if you are dedicated to your development. And again, anyone who has any other questions or anything with which I can be of any help, you guys have my Facebook, you guys have the Instagram, and you can send me a message anytime. We're always here to help. Thank you very much, guys.
Alrighty. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
We're going to be in touch, and we will do this again soon.
Sure.
Take care, guys.